Welcome to a new video. We're looking at the Tamron SP150 to 600mm F5-6.3 DIVC USD G2 lens. We're going to be comparing the EOS R full frame camera results as well as the 90D Aps-C results. That works out at 800mm and 960mm. So we're going to be addressing image quality by looking at these images. We're basically taking images across three apertures, f6.3, f8 and f16, and the ISO is 500. We're keeping the ISO as low as we can. We want to check out image quality and just have a quick look at center sharpness here on the EOS R. Center sharpness at 100% is reasonable at f6.3 on these lenses, but then it's not going to ever blow your mind in terms of sharpness. Here in this big circle here, there are hairs on there that are not showing up, so obviously it's not great in terms of sharpness there. Moving along down to the corner here, these boxes, these diamond shaped boxes, have patterns in them, and in the patterns we can't see any sort of detail at f6.3, so that is disappointing. And obviously over here these circles have patterns in them, and even going into 200% you can see there's nothing there. So let's just zoom out and look at the image at f8. Obviously we'd expect a bit more sharpness in the center, and we certainly have it there. Moving across to the circle here, it's doing a reasonable job. We can see some sharpness, and we can make out some detail of the hairs that are on the circle there. And moving down to the bottom here, let's see if we can see any patterns in these boxes, and they just look blurred out. I don't see anything. So what we're determining is, just like the old Tamron lens, it's not very sharp in the corners. Looking at this image, and obviously I will do a side-by-side comparing it with the Sigma Contemporary so you can see the differences, but that's what we're getting at f8. Let's see if we've got any sort of improvement at f16. So looking at this at f16, let's zoom in to the center at 100%. We can see there's a slight improvement there. So let's have a look over to the big circle here. It's resolving detail. I don't see any problems with diffraction at all. We can make out some patterns here in the circles here. Obviously you can see that there. So it is resolving some detail, certainly around the edges of the center. Let's have a look in the far corner, see if we've got any improvement. Looking at these boxes, we do appear to have some improvement in image quality, because we can see some patterns developing. So let's just go back to f8 in the corners, and if you can compare them, and f6.3 as well. So we want to go to 200%. So that's 6.3, that's f8, and then f16. Seems to me that f16 brings it back into play. If I'm comparing this with the Sigma Contemporary, I think f16 is comparable to f8 on the Sigma lens in terms of sharpness. So I do feel the Sigma Contemporary is resolving more detail, and I do think the Sigma Contemporary, despite what other YouTubers have said and done reviews of, they've done real world examples. This is a test chart, scientific test to determine image quality, and what I'm finding here is at 500mm we have to stop this lens down to f16 to get the detail in the corners. So let's have a look at 600mm. So this is obviously 600mm on the Tamron lens. Let's have a look at what it looks like at f6.3. Let's try and, obviously the centre's moved a little bit because I didn't quite get the framed up correctly because it was at 600mm. But we are getting some reasonable sharpness there. If we move over here, we can clearly see these hairs. So I do think these lenses actually perform better at the longer end rather than say 500mm, which is unexpected, to be honest with you. Let's have a look in the corner at 600mm, because that's where I get to see the sharpness. So it's f6.3 at 600mm. It's very interesting. It's similar sort of results to what I was getting with the Sigma, where it performed better at 600mm than it did at 500. And at f6.3 on the EOS R full frame, we are seeing some detail there. Like I said, if we just go back to 500mm, same sort of aperture, as you can see, it's quite blurred out, and you can only just slightly make out that a pattern is developing. But if we look at 6.3 at 600mm, it looks more defined, that pattern, so it looks better in my eye. So let's have a look at f8, see how that looks. So this is f8 at 600mm. Let's have a look at the center, see how we're doing for image quality. I like to go to 100% to have a look. We can see some hairs visible on this circle here, which looks pretty good. Let's go over to the squares, and it does seem to resolve detail a little bit better at f8 than it did at f6.3. Let's have a look at the image at f16 now. f16, have a look at the center. It's resolving good detail. We can see the hairs on the circle here more defined. It does seem that f16 brings this lens certainly in contention to being a sharp lens. So I'm seeing where I used to think f8 was where you need to stop the lens down to. I think realistically speaking, f16 gives you a better result. So let's have a look down at corners, because that's where we sort of find out how good the lens is. And clearly you can see a dramatic difference there at f16, where the majority of these squares with patterns in them have come into detail. We can see those, see that detail very clearly. It does seem a bit softer in the far corner, but it's resolving a good amount of detail. So I think on full frame you will be pretty happy with this lens. So let's have a look at Aps-C. Now I have tried to frame this further back in order to give it a similar sort of framing to what the full frame did, because it's magnified the center of the lens a little bit more. So like I said, we're getting 800mm at f6.3. So let's just have a look at the center where we're framed up here better than the previous frame, and have a look at 100% and see how we're doing for sharpness. Sharpness looks fairly okay. Let's move over to the circle. Those hairs are not really that defined on the big circle here, so obviously it doesn't give you great sharpness at f6.3. Let's have a look at these circles here again. These circles here do seem to represent some of the pattern, but it's not that defined. But again, I do like to go down into the far corner here and have a look at whether we get any sort of pattern detail in these squares. So I think the far square in the corner here is not very well defined. You know, you can see a little bit of a pattern developing, but you can't see it defined. A bit over here you can see there is a bit more of a pattern there, so it is better, more centered towards the actual where you've been focused. So let's move on to f8. Let's zoom in into the center, see how we're doing for sharpness. It looks reasonable. It's not tack sharp though, I will say that. Moving over to the circle here, again I can't really make out those hairs very well, so it does I do feel that the tightly packed pixels on Aps-C is a struggle for this lens. So you will always have to stop this down to try and get best results out of it. You know, looking at the circles here, we do seem to have lost any sort of pattern detail at all. Let's zoom in a bit more. it's just a blur. I don't see any sort of pattern at all. So let's move over. Again, looking at these patterns in the boxes, it's awash with blurriness. So it would appear that stopping down, let's just remind ourselves what our f-stop is again. At f8 we must be introducing diffraction to lose that detail, because it's just a wash of blurriness in the corners. So obviously this lens doesn't perform very well in the corners at all. So let's have a look at f16. Has that improved anything? Let's have a look in the center again. I think it's pretty much the same in the center. I don't really see any big difference. Looking at the circle here, those hairs that were visible on full frame are not visible on Aps-C, so obviously it's softer. Looking at the circles here again, it's just a wash of blurriness, not great in terms of sharpness. Let's assess the pattern in these boxes. I'm not seeing any sort of patterns in those boxes, so we are losing detail there. Let's go back to f6.3. You can see there is some detail. Remember, this is an equivalent of 500 millimeters full frame actually on the lens. So if you equate that to the 1.6 crop, it's 800 millimeters. So at 6.3 we seem to be seeing better detail than we do at f8 or f16, which is really unusual. I did not expect that, and it seems to be a similar thing with the Sigma as well. So obviously that's f8, that's f16, so this is equivalent to 800 millimeters. Now I want to have a look at sharpness at the long end, 600 millimeters end, which would be 960 millimeters. So let's have a look at f6.3 in the center. Again, we're a bit off here, but it shouldn't make much of a difference to the test. Looking at that, obviously it's not tack sharp, and let's move over to the circle. We can make out some of the hairs on this big circle here, but obviously it's not super sharp. And let's just go back into the corner. Obviously looking, you can see some pattern there at f6.3 on the circles here. So obviously 6.3 is certainly doing better than it was doing at f8, which is to be expected, I suppose, because what you're introducing is diffraction into the mix, I think, at f8. So I would recommend probably keeping this lens at f6.3, to be honest with you, on Aps-C. But let's have a look at the corners. I do want to address that. So f6.3, in the corners we can actually see the patterns here. Obviously we've got detail. It's not super sharp, but at least you can see good detail in the corner here with these patterns in the boxes. Let's have a look at f8. So f8, 600 millimeters, equivalent to 960 millimeters. Let's just zoom in there into the center again. Just look a bit on the softer side, to be honest with you. Let's move over to the big circle. Those hairs are not visible at all, so obviously it's not resolving fantastic sharpness at f8. I always believed that these lenses wouldn't perform well at f6.3, but it would appear it's opposite to that. We're getting good results at f6.3. Again, I do think the diffraction is coming in here because you can't see any detail or very little in terms of a pattern developing with the circles here. There's a little bit there, but nothing on the black bit here. It's just blown out. So let's have a look at these boxes that we've got in the far corner. You can see a little bit of a pattern, but it's very minor, very minor. You can't really make it out. If we go back to the f6.3, it's more defined. You can see it, but if we go to f8, we have a look there, and it's just not visible. Let's have a look at f16, see if it makes any difference. I suspect it won't, because we've got diffraction coming in. In fact, it should make the diffraction distortion worse. So obviously it's not greatly sharp in the center. We can't see any hairs at all. Obviously we could see something with the full frame, but we're not seeing that with the Aps-C. Go back to these circles here again. If we have a look, it seems worse than it did at f8. Let's just have a look at that. Let's go over to these circles. f8 versus f16. Yeah, it's more blown out, so diffraction definitely is having a toll on this lens, and I think it's no different to the Sigma as well. Let's move over to these boxes, which seem to be more blurred out than before. Even the number 1 itself looks blurred out, so it's not doing a great result at f16. We can do a comparison quickly by having a look at f8 and f6.3. So that's f6.3 at equivalent of 996 millimeters. That's at f8, blurred out more, and that's at f16, and it's even worse. So let's have a look at full frame quickly so you have an idea. f6.3, we have a pattern there. It's not greatly clear, but you can see it. f8 does seem to be a tiny improvement, not much, and f16, and clearly even at 100% you can see there is detail there. Zoom in at 200% on the EOS R full frame camera, we can see we have good detail. So it would appear that on these Sigma lenses, if you stop it down on full frame, you get better results, but if you try and stop it down on APS-C, you get worse results. Very interesting that. I did not expect that at all. I've always believed if you stop the lenses down to f8, you got better results, but it would appear not the case with the Sigma lens as well as the Tamron lens. So thank you for watching. I hope this was informative and useful to you. I hope you learned something with this video. There will be more examples coming to you. I want to do some real world examples as well as a side-by-side comparison of the Tamron and the Sigma side by side. We'll do that shortly, but I just wanted to go through the image quality individually on each lens so you can see it for yourself in terms of the sharpness. I hope this video was useful. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, it will really help people find these videos that are useful in terms of determining image quality. Many people have asked me to review this lens, so I finally got it in for you guys to finally look at it, and I can say that personally I think autofocus is a bit disappointed in speed on mirrorless cameras, but you won't notice the difference on your digital SLRs. In terms of sharpness, it's, despite what many YouTubers have said, they've claimed the G2 was better than Sigma Contemporary. I'm sort of in the mindset that I think the Sigma is a bit better than the Tamron, if I'm honest with you. I suspect the Sport will be a lot better than the Tamron. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you later in the next video. Bye bye.